It is day one of a brand new metagame. Let's take a look at the decks that are taking High Infinite by storm in Marvel Snap. Captain Carter's buff to 3-2 has been a notably powerful thing to happen, and it is taking a sort of prominent spot in what seems to be the High Infinite metagame. It's a very powerful thing to be doing, and I think we're finally going to put to the test in a real way just how strong an ongoing deck is allowed to be, because the numbers this deck puts out without being interacted with are extremely, extremely large. The major interaction that this deck is trying to take advantage of is that Captain Carter is 3 cost, which allows Moonstone at 6 to copy it. We also have the high roll of Iron Lad copying it, but basically what's going on here is we're trying to apply Moonstone to as many stupid things as possible. Previous iterations of this deck were trying to apply Moonstone to a Mystique, getting an extra Mystique on that lane. That's a very powerful thing to do when a Mystique is copying an Iron Man. Now we also have the Captain Carter as a massive boost to what these decks are capable of doing. This gets even better when you think about Moonstone being a card that is very often in that first or second spot and can pick up abilities from cards behind it. So not only is it maybe picking up a Captain Carter ability, it could also pick up a Goliath ability, which would make the Captain Carter ability that it passes on to the backline even bigger. An Ant-Man ability, again, doing the same thing. You can kind of see how this would get out of control fast. This is a deck that is pure points output and 1 tech slot, and that tech slot is used on Cosmo to protect the pure points output of this deck. It is exceedingly powerful, but there are some notable vulnerabilities. Red Guardian is a typically very good card against this deck. Enchantress is a typically very good card against this deck. Echo is a typically very good card against this deck because you can just drop it in the Moonstone lane and suddenly she's not really doing a lot. There's a lot that this deck can do, and I think it sort of sets a new baseline for what combo decks look like right now. This is a deck that plays like a combo deck. It plays like Discard or Mr. Negative more than it ends up playing like a normal mid-range deck. I think the Discard comparison is the one that is the most apt, where this can be a mid-range deck, but it's not great at being a mid-range deck, but it also has these built-in like, oh, I made 70 points in a lane kind of games. So that's always sort of been the upside of this deck. By losing out on Luke Cage and Anti-Venom, you do lose out on some explosiveness and confusion. There is a chance that a deck like this could just sort of get a little bit worse as people sort of understand what the ceiling is and start dealing with it appropriately. But right now, this is a very powerful thing to be doing that I think will really put to the test just how good anti-ongoing cards are. The previous list came to us by way of But. This list is another list that I got from a High Infinite player. This one, of course, is from Honifer and or Cougar. I'm not sure which one of them made it, but both of them sent it to me. And so this is a very straightforward attempt at including Captain Carter in a Surfer list, just generally being a strong thing to do. You can see that this deck has ways of disrupting the Moonstone deck. Juggernauts for late Moonstones are very powerful. Getting a copycat on some of those ongoing cards is very powerful. Being able to rogue a Captain Carter or a Moonstone is very powerful. Having these interactive tools is strong. Plus, of course, we have our 2-drop switching over to being Forge for the greater synergy with Captain Carter and everything else that a Surfer deck normally does. The one thing that sticks out to me about this list is I kind of wouldn't mind going further and trying to get a Red Guardian in here for a couple of different reasons. In part because I think it's just generally a pretty good card to have right now, but also in part because as a Luna Snow deck, we're going to have a lot more good Red Guardian targets even outside of the metagame that exists currently. Luna Snow is here to sort of be your Hope Summers type card that allows you to do 3+3 on turn 5. She's just doing that while giving you slightly more points. Other than that, Surfer looks fairly similar, but the point ceiling is notably higher. Thanks to Captain Carter, it's just a question of how much higher the point ceiling actually is and how much risk you're willing to take on by playing it. Because, as we've discussed, there's a lot of very good reasons to play ongoing or anti-ongoing cards right now. Opening yourself up to that might not actually be the best idea, although Surfer is much more able to diversify its threats than the ongoing deck is able to. If you aren't running into too much of the ongoing deck, I think Classic Surfer is kind of in an interesting spot, and I'm bringing this up just because I think it might actually be worth considering Goose in a world where the ongoing stuff gets really popular. Goose is an extremely metagamed kind of card. I don't typically like this card, and I'm not overly like, ooh, wow, this is the greatest thing ever, but when there's enough Moonstones running around, I don't think it's the worst idea to at least try. So I wanted to put this on here because I almost never get to talk about Goose actually maybe contextually being a decent card, because it very rarely actually is. Right now, when there's a bunch of Moonstone stuff rolling around, and there's a lot less of the decks that are just like playing 8 million scalers that just like eat Goose for breakfast, that is generally the metagame where this card could be considered actually playable. And I think that while I'm not necessarily endorsing it, I do think it's notable that that seems like the direction we could be headed. I've talked a lot about the ways in which we are able to, make the metagame change thanks to the new Captain Carter, who seems to be the most impactful card out of the OTA. But what's shocking to me, or maybe not all that shocking, is that despite everything I'm talking about, a lot of people are just like, you're going to have to prove it to me. I'm going to play Thanos, and I'm just going to Thanos my way out of whatever situation comes up, because my entire deck is 85 different tech cards. That seems like a pretty solid thing to actually be doing right now. Like, it's not going to be as good as it was before Captain Carter, because I think you have a pretty poor matchup into a bunch of Captain Carter stuff. But what I will say is, for reasons that I can't fully explain with, like, logic or anything like that, this is still probably the most popular deck at High Infinite. I don't think it's very great right now. I think it's got a lot of room to grow, because this is still a deck from before Captain Carter, and it's got a bunch of different tech cards, and it's still playing all the same tech cards. I basically think that this deck might be like 3 cards off what actually needs to be happening here. This deck might need to adapt to ongoing stuff by getting some real more anti-ongoing tech in here beyond just a Red Guardian. But Thanos is strong enough that I think once we find the correct build for a classic Thanos list, this could end up being in a really good spot. I also wonder about the utility or the potential for being an ongoing Thanos deck right now. I have a little bit of worries that we aren't going to be as good at being a Captain Carter Moonstone deck as the dedicated Captain Carter Moonstone decks, and those decks are going to be good enough that they're going to invite a lot of tech that is going to be good against an ongoing Thanos list. It's possible I have that backwards, and ongoing Thanos is better at using Captain Carter. I'm not sure that I do, though. And all of that is to say that I think where I want to be for Thanos right now is a sort of anti-meta tech-based Thanos, which means I would like to take this, and I would like to spend like 8 hours trying to figure out the exact correct 12 cards to be putting in here. I think that the cards that I like more than I did previously are Red Guardian and Alioth. Cards that I like less than I did previously, Shang-Chi and Shadow King. That's sort of where I'd start investigating. Infinity Ultron Hela has been a typically relevant thing to at least try, but it is in a bit of an awkward spot because Hela is very predicated on my high rolls are just going to beat the mid-range decks. And as long as people are doing this Captain Carter stuff, like the dedicated Captain Carter decks just have more points than you. So while I do think that Infinity Ultron was a notable boost to the archetype, it did get a little bit better, you do kind of really have to respect the level of points. It's almost like playing against a Mr. Negative deck when you play against one of those Captain Carter Moonstone decks. They have like the Captain Carter Moonstone lane. They have like the lane that they put multiple Iron Men in thanks to Mystique. And you're just sitting there looking at them like, I made so many giant things come back and none of it matters because you have 70 points in 2 lanes. And having that ability, being able to be a deck that can bully Hela is part of why I like the ongoing decks. But it does mean that this deck might have to get put on the back burner where I was previously very excited for it because the point ceiling of this metagame got so much drastically higher. Now, if people are able to correctly hate the Captain Carter decks out of the metagame, if a bunch of anti-ongoing tech starts showing up, then suddenly this deck will be there to beat up on the decks that are playing all the anti-ongoing tech. There are few cards more embarrassing than an Enchantress and a Rogue in a world where you're playing against Hela. That's just one of the most embarrassing things you could ever try to bring to battle. And so Hela does have a niche. I just don't know if it's going to hit that right now. Might be the kind of thing that we have to wait and see for how this metagame develops, how strong Captain Carter ends up being in the face of, again, the best tech suite in the game. Dealing with low power ongoing cards is the most diverse group of tech cards we've ever had to deal with anything. We have Red Guardian, we have Enchantress, we have Rogue, we have Echo. There are so many cards that are so good against this stuff that it is really interesting to finally see a card with the power level of new Captain Carter face off against a tech suite with the power level that it has the ability, that has the power that, you know what I'm saying? I'm saying that the tech cards for this are really, really strong, and that if those tech cards force Captain Carter out of the meta, hell is going to be good against the decks playing those tech cards. You get it. Speaking of, this is a deck that gets to run Enchantress for free. That is just a viable thing to be trying to do right now. You are just interested in being able to do that. I do have a few worries about Enchantress alone being enough, because all of the decks that play Captain Carter respectably, in my opinion, have the ability to play either Cosmo or Juggernaut, meaning that late Enchantresses might not be nearly as good as you want them to be, but also the more dedicated you are to ongoing, the more lanes you have that are vulnerable to an Enchantress, and you only really have the one Cosmo unless you Mystique it. So, with all of that in mind, I do think that Enchantress is still a good starting point for trying to counter this metagame, and I do think that this deck is a very easy inclusion for Enchantress. A lot of great points, and a good relevant tech card. You really can't ask for more. Stefan has attempted to force the game the other direction here, and this is by going for an even smaller, even more lean package of big guys in relevant interaction. I wonder about just slapping an Enchantress in here too. I think that's like an entirely viable direction to go. And then you just have this deck that's basically playing a Sarah control style game plan without actually having to play Sarah, because not only do we have Fastos in as much as that matters, all of our cards are super cheap and super big. So we just have a million different ways to be a small package ongoing deck, or a small package anti-ongoing deck, where even if they're not an ongoing deck, if they're playing like a fair game of Marvel Snap, if they're doing what we're doing and trying to be fair and have the tech for ongoing stuff, we're good into that too, because we have just so many stats. We get to just be the kind of deck that just has a million different stats and also gets the anti-ongoing stuff in the form of our very actually relevant Echo. Derek is attempting to flip the ongoing mirror on itself by being an afflict Captain Carter ongoing deck. The goal here is to be the Captain Carter deck that beats the other Captain Carter decks. I think this is a genuinely interesting and compelling direction to attempt to go. We have the additional explosiveness of Luke Cage and, of course, the anti-venom. And this is sort of more similar to the style of ongoing deck that I typically enjoy, with that Luke Cage anti-venom built in, with that ability to be powerful. But, I mean, it is an ongoing deck, and it doesn't have Cosmo, and there's a lot of anti-ongoing cards right now. And if you aren't being the massive ongoing guy, like, yeah, maybe you can get it done with, like, Luke Cage hazmat stuff. Maybe. But there really is just kind of a lot of people, or there are just kind of a lot of people who are prepared to deal with this kind of stuff. I do like the explosiveness. I like the anti-venom. I like the Luke Cage. I like that package. I like that we have a bunch of numbers. We are still an ongoing deck, though. And so being the Captain Carter deck that beats the other Captain Carter decks, that appeals to me in theory. We've also got to beat other matchups. If you asked me which deck I think benefited the most from everyone doing what they're doing right now, that is also seeing the least play, I think it would be Enchantress Clog. This is a deck that was already running Enchantress just to turn Sam Wilson into a downside for its opponents. Now it's running Enchantress against a bunch of decks that really care about where things are, a bunch of decks that really care about how they're using their board space. All that stuff really matters, and oh, by the way, you get to just ruin them ruthlessly. I think that Clog is in a very potentially powerful position going into this metagame. I realize it's day one, but if you ask me what my sleeper pick is for one of the best decks, if not the best deck, I think Clog has a real shot at getting there. There are basically zero location changers in the metagame beyond a Thanos reality stone. Like, you are just not worried about your magic. You get to just play magic and not care about it. You clog up your opponents, you play your Enchantress, you play your Cannonball, they lose. I have a problem with Scream, and it's that I want to fit Red Guardian in, and I don't exactly know how to fit Red Guardian in. right now my leading contender is I think I want to cut Iron Patriot. And a lot of this is I want Red Guardian in here, but I don't want to cut Rocket and Groot because Rocket and Groot taking a point of power off Captain Carter is actually kind of relevant some of the time. But I really want the Red Guardian in here so we have at least some answer to this Captain Carter BS that is happening right now. Red Guardian is like, of all the actual anti-ongoing cards, I think Red Guardian is the card that we're going to see the most of in terms of like what is being teched into these decks to deal with this. Because while Enchantress and Rogue and Echo are really interesting and really cool, Red Guardian just has basically no downside and is also occasionally extremely relevant against this Captain Carter stuff. So I've been really trying to figure out what it's supposed to be. I figure it's either Stegron or Iron Patriot or Rocket and Groot. I'm leaning Iron Patriot, but I'm not actually sure. I really just want to get some kind of actual answer in here because frankly, this deck still is quite powerful. So that's where we are right now. At the top of Infinite, there's a lot of people messing around with Captain Carter stuff, but frankly, there's even more people who are just playing a pretty okay Thanos deck. To me, what that means is that this metagame is ripe for the taking. This is the time to innovate. If so many people are just willing to play, you know, a fairly okay but nothing special Thanos deck right now, I think that means that there is real opportunity for growth and change in this metagame, and these are the days that we must seize, my comrades. And all of this is really, I do want to talk for just like 2 seconds about the Thanos thing, because I do think that like it is crazy to me. I looked on Untapped, it has 450 games in the top 10% in like since the patch. And so like basically no other deck is like above 200 games in the top 10%. People have just sort of been like defaulting to Thanos in the days after patches the way that they used to default to Arishem. I find that fascinating. I just wanted to get that out there and mention it. The point I'm making is whether it be via Captain Carter in a full investment type of thing or by dealing with the Captain Carter stuff in a more traditional shell like Thanos or Scream, or just by clogging people, I think that there is a lot of equity being left on the table right now by people who are just playing safe choices. And this is the time to explore those new frontiers. Thank you so much for watching. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And I will see you in the next one.